Sean.
Marco.
We are here to deliver a message from the RSA conference team.
It's an important message from our friends. RSA Conference 2025, just around the corner, where insights drive action, solutions emerge, and community connections spark innovation. You'll be there. I'll be there. We invite everybody else to be there April 28th through May 1st. You can secure your spot at rsaconference.com/ITSPMAG25. That's ITSPMAG25. See you all there.
I'll be there. See you there. Hello, everybody. This is Marco Ciappelli. I am back on Audio Signals podcast after a little bit of traveling and taking care of my other podcast, which is all about society and technology. But as you all know, my passion beside work, it's storytelling. And that's why I have Audio Signal podcast, where we talk about storytelling, storytellers, and the stories that they write. And the way I like to start is always with the question, who is the storyteller that we're talking to? If you're watching the video, you already see it there. Sam Foster, welcome to the show. And if you're listening, here it is. Sam, how are you doing today?
Good morning, Marco. Thank you for having me on. I'm grateful.
Oh, I love it. And you know what I love? I love that we're here with technology, talking to each other on a streaming platform, recording platform. And we are about, depending on traffic, I would say 40 minutes to an hour and a half because it's LA and that happened. So you're down in the South Bay in LA, I'm in the Valley, and well, maybe hopefully after this we'll get to get a coffee together and
I'd like that.
And get to know each other, maybe down at the beach. But before we do that.
I think you used to live in my part of the world. Maybe I can get you down to the beach for that cup of coffee.
Yeah, it's not the first time that I mentioned that. That's where I spent most of my time in LA, Hermosa Beach, and you're just next to it. So let's start with my favorite question, and you can go as deep as you want and as on the surface as you want. Who is Sam Foster?
Sam Foster is a man who grew up in a 19th century world in the Midwest. Not to be political, I don't mean that, but I think my story is not so dissimilar than Vice President-elect Vance's story in his book about Hillbilly Elegy. I come from a town in Illinois, which is now about 6,000 people. When I was a kid, it was about 10,000 people. In the middle of the 19th century, it was one of the most prosperous communities in Illinois. It was a river port, it was wealthy, and it was cultured. And over the years, all of the things that created its wealth have declined. The population is less than half of what it was at its maximum. And the industry has left, the primary industry being the railroad. It had a roundhouse, it had a shop, and when the town was about 12,000 people, over 1,000 of those were employed by the railroad. When the railroad moved, all of those jobs went away. The city has never been able to replace them. It's now a dying little place. I came to Los Angeles to go to college. I'd never been here. But I knew when I left home, the truth of the matter is, Marco, that I never even thought about going back. And it was not animus. Just as a child growing up, I saw no place for me there. I saw no opportunity to really make any sort of life. And so I have stayed in Los Angeles since then. As per your creative question, and that gets in here with me, but because I didn't grow up with money, I worked 3 to 11 loading trucks in Vernon to work my way through college. And because I didn't grow up with money, when I got out of school, even though all I wanted to do was read, even as a young man, if you put me on a couch on a Sunday with a book, I was apt to read until bedtime and get up early in the morning to try to finish the story. And some of your readers will understand that and some won't, but that's just the nature of the beast. but I was unwilling to starve for art. I was unwilling to live in a cold water flat in a garret apartment and starve to put out words into the world. And so I went to work in a business that simply made money. I didn't hate it. I don't remember having ever woken up and thought, oh shit, I have to go to work today. But I had no passion for it. It was just something that paid well and I was good at. When I had my mortgage paid off and both of my kids' tuition paid through private schools, I started to indulge myself. I started to write. And I tease with people a lot in this question, but the only thing I have in common with Raymond Chandler, aside from the fact that we're both authors, is that both of us wrote our first two books while we were executives in downtown Los Angeles firms. And I did write my first two books while I was working, and I had the good fortune to find a publisher. I never did find an agent, but I found a little publishing house that took me on. The world's different than that now. You don't get to a publishing house without an agent, but that's the way it was. This was in the very late 90s. They published two books for me. And it was not until I retired 10 years ago that I took up writing on a full-time basis. And when I say full-time, Marco, I think I have fulfilled my childhood position, but I do not require writing income to live on. My work life has given me enough of a retirement to live on. So for me, writing is what I do because I have passion. And I don't know how many of your audience listeners are retirees, but my experience with men, and I can't speak for women, but with men, is that we all need purpose. I think women are perhaps a little more balanced than we. My sense is that women can go through life being content and happy with the routine of the day they put in front of them. But I don't know many men who cannot live without a purpose, something they want to do, something they're striving for, something they're reaching out to. And so for me, writing gives me a reason to get up in the morning. It is my life and it is my passion.
Well, that's really cool because I feel like, as they say, if you do what you love, you don't have to work a day in your life. On the other hand, you did work, you didn't mind it, but it wasn't, as you said, it wasn't the passion, the fire that you had inside. Now,
Right.
my question is, when you were doing this day-to-day job, was it always in the back of your mind? Was it a burning sensation, the fact that I can't wait to really have the time to start writing? Were you writing on the side? Were you noting about, when I can, I will write this book about this? I mean, or were you just okay with just putting on the back burner?
The latter. I think, Marco, and this is probably my temperament, I don't know this is humanity, but had I let myself indulge that fantasy too early on, it would have taken too much out of me. My life was simply simpler if I didn't indulge myself with that fruit that was hanging not low, but somewhere far in the distance. So I was able to keep my focus on what I was doing.
Mm.
And in truth, when I was in my 50s, I started to realize that if I got fired tomorrow and nobody would ever hire me again, my life was going to be okay.
Mm.
And then the fantasy started to take me. I have always been two things my whole life. One of them is I've always been a storyteller. My conversation, if you and I were to meet in a bar or you and I were to meet for a cup of coffee, I would mostly listen to you, because when you ask me a question that you wanted me to answer, it would take me 5 minutes to answer. I was going to tell you a story, not going to give you a short answer. That's always been one affirming aspect of my personality throughout. And the other one was that I've always written well. A lot of young men at work would come to me and ask me if I would read this memo that they were putting out.
Mm.
My answer to them always became the same. I will read it if you want me to, but don't ask me my opinion unless you want it, because if you want it, I'm going to give it to you. And so I sort of became the editor in the office. So I guess I've always had those two things that were fundamental aspects of my personality, but I didn't want to indulge them when I had to focus on doing other things. But
Do you think, I'm going to pause you there, because
sure.
do you think there is a big difference, and it could, maybe it's common based on your experience and the people you were working with, between having a good story to tell and knowing how to tell it? Now, knowing how to put it in word, now know how to put it in writing.
There's
you know where I'm going?
I do, exactly, Marco. And there's a huge difference. How many people do you and I know, does everybody who's listening to this know, that talk too much and they bore you? They don't know how, they've got something to weave, but they don't know how to weave it. And so, yes, I think there's a very big difference of that. And I think in my case, I think my education came from reading. I think I have read fiction my whole life.
Yeah.
The summer I was 15 years old, I grabbed Michener's Hawaii, 900 pages, terrifying. I'd never tried anything that big in my life. And I spent most of the summer reading, laying on the couch, just fascinated with the way Michener could put words together and tell that story. So I think my skill as a storyteller comes from reading. I don't think my skill as a writer comes from my ability to tell stories.
But they go together. I mean, if you read many quotation, many stories from famous writer, what they usually tell you is you have to read a lot. In order to create your own style, and in order to kind of get inspiration as well. Like, many people think like, oh, I like this writer and I want to write like that person. I don't think that usually happen if you have the writing inside yourself, but you do get inspired. It's like being a musician. You can listen to some music, a riff gets in your head, but then you make it your own.
I'm not musical in any way, but the metaphor works for me, Marco. I mean, it seems to make sense to me, even though I don't emotionalize what you just said, the latter part, at least.
Yeah. Got it. But the writing, obviously, that works. Now, tell me about writing about what you know, because I know that your stories, they're based in the Midwest. You told me that you come from the Midwest. Is there like an experience that about your life that then you put in your fiction as well, or what is it you write about? Yes
to all three questions that you asked. The first book I ever wrote, and again, I will remind you that I said the first two books I wrote while I was working. The first one I ever wrote was called Alpha Male, A Tale of the Battle of Commerce. And it was about a financial hustle in my own business. Now, I don't mean that hustle existed. I made up the hustle, but I knew the business. I was opening a world for people that didn't know commercial real estate to see how that world functioned, but doing it in a way that they liked the story. And interestingly, Marco, that particular book, is still in print, and it came out in 2001. And every commercial real estate person in the country has read the damn thing. I have been in meetings, one time in Florida. I'm an LA guy. I don't know anybody in Florida. I'm at this business meeting where we're all wearing name tags, and I see some guy walking straight. He's making a beeline for me right across the floor. And I don't know who he is. I wait to read his name tag. I still don't know who he is. And he stuck his hand out and he said, "Loved your book." But it never broke out of that market. So it became clear to me that I wasn't telling the story well enough that people who didn't already understand the marketplace in which it occurred could appreciate the story. So it was a book about my own world, but I wasn't doing a great job of conveying it. My second book was also a book that I knew intimately. My second book was about the Marine Corps, and I'm a Marine. As you may know, the motto of the Marine Corps is Semper Fidelis, always faithful. The title of the book is Non Semper Fidelis, which doesn't say never faithful. That translation is not always faithful. And it was about my experience in the Marine Corps. Marco, there's not a shot fired in anger in the whole book. The whole thing is stateside. But when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was killed, I was in a Marine Corps battalion that had race riots. Now, the Marine Corps very zealously guards its reputation. They're more PR interested than any other service. And the word of that never got out. That never appeared. It was Quantico, Virginia, which is only 30 miles from Washington, D.C. And that story never got in the Washington Post. They didn't know it happened. And so I thought it was an interesting story to tell. But again, it was a world that I had lived. And so you're absolutely right. I found it much easier to tell stories about things that I understood intimately than to tell stories about things that I had to learn to tell the story. And it was not until my third book, which I wrote when I had nothing but time, I was retired, I was away, I had time, where I reached into a world that I didn't know to write it. It was still staged in the Midwest. It was still staged in the area where I grew up, but it was a story of the 18th and early 19th centuries. So some of the woof and warp of that story I did grow up with, hearing stories around it and so forth, but mostly I didn't know it. Mostly it was 2 weeks in the Abraham Lincoln Library in Springfield, Illinois. That was the first time I learned to sort of reach out for myself. But my first stories were exactly as you described them. They were of my own experience.
Is that on the third book, which is also a trilogy, that you step into more of a fiction world? Like,
yes.
I'm understanding is historical fiction, which is something I want to talk about before we get into your present book, which is there's always that line when I talk to people that do write historical fiction, where do you draw a line between the reality and the fiction, the nonfiction and the fiction world? How do you get in between and make the story interesting and real, but also bringing people in a world that may not ever existed?
I have a rule that I self-impose.
Can you
on
share
exactly that, on exactly what you just said. And not all historic fiction writers agree with me, and not all historic fiction readers agree with me. But my view is that as an author of fiction, and it is fiction, I don't owe obedience to individual facts. But what I do owe absolute obedience to is the arc of history. I'm not writing an alternate history.
Right.
If I'm going to write what happened if the South had actually won the Battle of Gettysburg, I'm going to label it alternate history. I'm not going to make it historical fiction, right? So I never change outcomes. Well, I shouldn't say never. I did one time. I could not resist putting Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln in the same room when they were young men. But I put a historic fiction note at the back that said, I made that shit up. That didn't actually happen.
Let's make it clear, right?
Yeah.
And what drives you to do that? Is it it is in a way exploring an alternative reality, but it's not alternative fiction or alternative history. So again, where was it something you read that inspired you to do this, a movie you saw, or just stories that you had in your head as an experience from the people that told you where you were growing up?
That your question for me was a very interesting little personal journey. The third book in that series are all stories that I grew up with. Now, I shouldn't say all. I mean, I did a lot of research. I added in a lot of fact, but the fundamental stories in that book were stories that I learned at my grandfather's knee. And that had been his home his whole life. The other two books are precursors to that. And I guess, Marco, it's the way I think and process information, but it wasn't enough to tell the stories as I understood them. I kept wondering why. Why did that happen? Why did people think that way? Why did they behave that way? And it wasn't my intention to get pushed back 2 centuries, but there kept being linkages between somebody did something, but why did they do that? And they would do something that didn't make sense. Why did they do that? My mind is endlessly curious. I'm 80
But
years
you go
old,
from
full of questions.
you went from the point of arrival, but then you wanted to figure out how did they get there.
Right. That's exactly right. And so that pushed me back all the way until the time that white settlers started rushing into the Midwest. And that was after the War of 1812. That's when it happened. And until then, it had been almost entirely indigenous population with indigenous issues and indigenous conflicts and indigenous ways of life. But after the French and Indian War, Caucasians came flooding down the Ohio River. And so that's really when my connection with it started. And I went all the way back. I went all the way back to that. I didn't mean to. It just happened.
Well, it sounds like like kids. Why that? And then you give an answer, and but I get it. But then why that?
And I was that little boy. I was that little boy in 2nd grade class. You've got
and I can picture you because I'm very visual, sitting on your grandpa laps and listening to the story, and they stayed with you. I mean, I feel the same. A lot of the way I am, it's because story told by my grandfather in Italy. And with that, unless you would like to add something to the trilogy, I want to take the last 10 minutes to actually get into your new book, because I feel it close to home. Because it's you say you can travel to Italy to do your research. I am assuming you enjoy that, and you choose to talk about women from the Middle Age or the Renaissance. And I am curious about that, coming from the cradle of the Renaissance myself.
For the sake of your audience, I want to say something that you and I both already know. The title of the book is Thy Mother is a Lioness. It is the story of 3 women and 1 little girl, so 4 females, in late 15th and early 16th century Italy. And it is a story of women's use of power. And all of the women, every one of them are real. The story is again fictionalized, but I did immense amounts of history on these 3 ladies, 4 ladies actually. They're all related. 2 of them married into the Medici family, but the Medici family is the linchpin of the whole thing. 2 of them married into the Medici family, and the other one, a little girl who grew up in France and lived her life in France, but her mother was Catherine de' Medici, and so she learned all these stories at mama's knee, just like I learned my stories. And I'll tell you the way I got fascinated with them, and they came to my attention. You're a Los Angeles guy, so you'll get this. But and it's also part of our discussion about the creative process. 15 years ago, in the Sunday Times, there was a full-page story about some Italian woman I'd never heard of named Maria Silviati. And the thing that caught my fascination is the Walters Museum in Baltimore, Maryland, owns a portrait of this woman. The portrait was painted by a guy named Pontormo, who was the Medici house painter for about 50 years. Not all Medicis are painted by him because there are too many generations. But in his lifetime, he was their guy. And there is a picture of her in a Dominican habit. She was a 3rd order Dominican, which meant she was never lived in a cloister. She could live outside and still call herself a Dominican. And the bottom third of the painting is painted out with black paint, just painted over. And Nobody knew what was under there, and the paint was so thick they were afraid to try to take it off. They were afraid they'd ruin what was under there. And it was not until 1937 when fluoroscopy became a science that somebody was able to look under that black paint and see what was there. And what was under there was a little 7 or 8-year-old girl who clearly had Negroid features, clearly mixed breed Negroid features. And Maria Salviati, the Salviati family, and now I'm going to talk Italian history that only Marco knows, but they were part of the Pazzi conspiracy. They got killed afterwards because they tried to kill off the Medici. And to try to make nice, Cosimo de' Medici married one of his daughters into the Salviati family to say, come on, we don't need to do this. You know, we're not going to have street warfare between your sons and mine. And what the heck is she doing with this protective glare, looking straight at the camera, if you will, protecting this little girl, saying, don't you touch her. Mm. And that was 400 years ago. And originally nobody knew why. And when they backtracked on the history, they found out why. And that story sat in the back of my mind for 15 years and just percolated, Marco, percolated slowly. It would go away. It would come back. I would ask why. And I wanted to know, it's back to the question we had about creativity. Why? Why, teacher? Why, teacher? I don't know if you've ever heard that Louis C.K. bit on his daughter saying why. It's one of the funniest things you've ever heard. But that was me. Why, teacher? Why, teacher? And I couldn't get rid of it. So I started reading and I started finding out. And what I came to understand was that there were 3 women over 3 generations in the Medici family that were tough as nails in a man's world. And Maria Salviati in particular used gentleness to get her way, but she got her way. And she was a Medici, she was a Florentine, she was all political, and she was a conniving bitch who wanted what she wanted, but she knew the best way to get it was to put on that habit, smile, and go through life with everybody thinking she was as sweet as could be. And it just became a story. I don't need to say anything about Catherine de' Medici. Everybody's got their own opinions, knows what her life was. But the other woman in the story is a woman named Caterina Forza. And the Forzas ran Milan for 4 generations. And Forza was not originally their name until one of the ancestors killed the Duke of Milan and took it over. Forza, you probably know the Italian translation. It's simply forceful. And they took that name because they were forceful. Interestingly, both of these families, whether they were martial or whether they were political, treated their young women the same way they treated their sons. That is to say, these women were educated. Multiple languages, they understood politics, they understood everything that was going on in the world. They knew how to play, they were taught how to play, they were taught what the rules were, they were taught how to break the rules. The Forzas were a little different because the Forzas, in addition to all of those skills that they taught their women, the Forzas also taught their women to be warriors. But when I say warriors, I mean both leading armies and skill of individual arms. And Caterina Forza, you may know her story, but she controlled 2 of the old papal estates. And Pope Borgias, one of the Borgia popes, the first one, set out to get them back. And she literally went to war with them and trained and led her own armies. And she also married into the Medici family. So you've got this succession of wonderfully powerful women in a terribly male-dominated world using multiple different kinds of tools to get where they wanted to go, to get what they wanted. And that story just fascinated me. Mm. And so it percolated in there for forever. And when I finally decided to get out of my comfort zone and write about something that I didn't instinctively know about, that I had to do all the research on, I decided that was going to be the one.
Sounded to me that you're always driven by that question, why, right? And which makes you research, because trust me, my dad is from Florence. He has more books about the Medici in his house that he could honestly be the National Library. He knows a lot about it.
I
He's
love
one
your
of
father automatically, don't I, Marco?
he's he's 87, just turned 87, and that's what all he reads about. He don't touch Florence to him and the history. And sometimes they criticize me because like, you don't know these things, and I'm like, no, I know other things. It's like to each his own. But my point is, go ahead.
I was going to say your daddy might hate my story because the whole world's take and all of those books your father's got, Maria Salviati is angelic, but her son Cosimo, as you may know, of the two Cosimos, he was the most powerful. He actually became the Duke of Tuscany, not just Florence.
Mm-hmm. The Grand Duke, right?
And he was brutal, as you may know. He took over Florence at age 17. He had his cousin killed, who was the first Duke of Florence, to get there. And I don't think a 17-year-old kid has those skills. I think somebody that was immensely politically skillful was driving that bus. And I think it was his mother. And so mine is fiction. It's heavily researched, but it's fiction. But your dad is probably going to say, Marco, give me that man's address. I'm going to get you out.
But one thing I have to say is that there is a process, I think, more and more lately all over the world. But for what I know from my dad too, is of, history is being rewritten, right? There are things now that we didn't know that were presented in a certain way, but then we find out that the dynamics were not what they looked to be or how they were portrayed. So what you're describing here, it's not unique in terms of rewriting certain piece of history, especially a very complex family, soap opera, if you want. If you want to call it some way, of intrigues and marriage and attempt and congiura dei pazzi and all of that. But beside what my dad may think about it, which I would definitely have him read it if you have an Italian translation because he doesn't speak English, what people can expect from reading your book? Because you're talking about a lot of research, you're talking about a lot of facts, but then you connect it with what we talked about before, which you add fiction to it. So are you trying to tell a moral of a story? Don't give it away. I want people to read it. But what will be your elevator pitch for telling people, read this book if you're in this kind of stories?
Marco, when I was a junior in high school, I remember this conversation in an English class in high school very clearly. And the teacher was trying to explain to 16 and 17-year-olds the levels of writing, that there is the story, there is simply the storyline in the story, but then there is the picture of the world. But behind that, there is always a reason that the writer wanted you to read it, what he was trying to say about the world. And we were all 16 and didn't get it. We just thought there was a story. And she kept pestering the class. And nobody was getting that stories are written to convey a moral picture of the world. And I finally raised my hand and she called on me and I said, the reason he wrote it was because the rent was due. It took me forever to understand that, in fact, each and every story has got this underlying message. I mean, Dick is not just about killing the biggest, ugliest whale in the Pacific Ocean. That ain't the story. And if that's all you see and you're amused, good for you. But that's not what he's trying to say.
There's
And
always underneath the layer.
right. And it is the same way with these books. But the message I am trying to convey in this particular book is, and I think this is a message from my mother. My mother grew up in the Dust Bowl, and she ended up the head of the Department of Education at a state university and started a community college as well. She was absolutely driven to get ahead in life and not be a Dust Bowl Okie. And she never gave up on that. And maybe that's what I see in these women, that in a world that is completely male dominated, each of these women in her own and very distinct way found a way to create the world she wanted and display power. And I think you told me not to give it away, but I think that's what the book is saying.
I think it doesn't give it away, meaning, oh, now I don't need to read it. It's not a mystery that you're telling the butler did it.
One of the, I don't know if I've got another minute left, but there are two things
go for it.
I'd like to say, if I may. The first one is I'd like to give a small commercial to the book. And the reason I'd like to give the commercial, the title of the book is the quote from Ezekiel, "Thy mother is the lioness." That's a biblical quote, but I thought it fit these women. Mm-hmm. But you pointed out that I'm forever asking the question, why? And I have become quite dissatisfied with the American publishing business. I don't write for the money. My world before writing paid for my retirement, unless I live a whole lot longer than I think I'm going to live. But in my book, Beardstown, which sold for $16.95, I made 27 cents a copy. That process just offends me. I'm not saying I need the money. I'm not saying I'm not going to pay the light bill. The process offends me. And I'm a businessman, so I'm always looking for a better, more efficient, more productive way to do it. And so I have released this book exclusively on Substack. And many of your listeners may not know Substack, but Substack is sort of the modern American newspaper. There are columnists that write for it. And the last number I saw, it had 24 million monthly page reads. So it's not your hometown Gazette. It's not the New York Times, but it's moving forward. And Substack has a really interesting methodology. There are any number of people who write on Substack and don't charge anything to look at their column. And if that's the way you do it, Substack will host the platform for free. It doesn't cost the writer a thing. If the writer decides to charge for his column, Substack takes 10% of that. And Substack has got over 17,000 writers who write for fee, not for free, and over 1 million readers who pay to read what's written on Substack. I have been writing a Substack column for free for 2 years now. And I decided that I would try to release Mother on Substack for fee. Substack is also very interesting in that the minimum payment they will accept is $5. That's set by Substack. But after that, the author can set his own price. And Substack will, however, when you go in, say, what do you want to pay? And you have to pay at least the minimum that the author asks, but they allow people to say, this is more worthy than that to me. So Substack's minimum is $5. My minimum is $5, but pay me what you will. And even if the book doesn't sell, I told one of my friends, there is no dignity in 27 cents. There is more dignity in gratis than there is in 27 cents. So I'm trying this on Substack. I don't know if it's going to work or not, but it's been released. It started the 10th of November. It just came out. Every new subscriber gets all the previously posted chapters. I send them to them by email, so it's not like you're hopping in on chapter 13 and don't know what happened.
Right.
I am just trying a different and more contemporary way to do it.
Well, I love that. I mean, as you know, my other real job, it's talking about technology and creating podcasts, but my past life also is branding and advertising. So I understand all of this, and I understand how social media have changed the music industry, the writing, all the arts, really, photography. We're not getting into generative AI now. We don't have time for that. But definitely, it kind of, to me, says creativity is still a human endeavor. It's what I believe still make us completely different from technology, real creative emotions, make a close generative AI, but the instrument that we have to play with, the tools, have definitely changed. And we can stay there and cry that people don't buy album anymore, or people don't buy book anymore, or the industry it's ruining it for the writers that get pennies. But I appreciate people like you, and I know others, that they try to move on with this technology and take some different path. And I hope this works. I know people that are on Substack, and they get a pretty good amount of money, and either you do it for the money or not. And that's what I say for you and for any other writer, is that we need to recognize the art, not just when you pay $6 million for a banana on a tape and then you eat it, but for people that actually write something. They put their time, they write a music, take photography, paint, whatever. I think art needs to be valued and needs to be paid for. The fact that it's on the internet doesn't mean it's free. It means that we didn't do anything. I mean, I give my podcast for free, but then I look for sponsors. I need to make money somehow. There is different methods to do that. So I invite people to give it a go, and I think the $5 minimum or more to read a good book, it's a good thing. And also because the money goes to you instead of to another middleman, another middleman, and another middleman. So that's my support to what you're doing.
And the economics of Substack interests me because it's cheaper for the reader than conventional methodologies.
Yep.
And the creator makes more than with conventional technologies. Yep. It's just what you said. All those middle people are cut out.
Yep.
Straight.
You don't need to spend money in printing books and papers and all of that. So technology is there, and I appreciate the fact that you're using that, and paradoxically, you're presenting historic books, but you're using modern technology to do that. So,
that had never occurred to me until you just said it, Marco.
Well, and this is the last thing I said, and then we'll call it off, and maybe you come back another time, because I really enjoyed this conversation with you. But I was in Australia, Melbourne, and right at the convention where I was covering this conference, there was a Leonardo da Vinci immersive museum experience. Like they did it in Van Gogh here in LA, and so I'm like, oh, perfect, Leonardo da Vinci. Maybe I'll go see it. I ended up not having the time for that, but even that idea to take all the paintings, put it in a way that you experience in virtual reality, you immerse yourself in it. I mean, I love to go to the Uffizi, don't get me wrong. I like to sit in front of a painting, but I appreciate different experience.
I understand the Uffizi has changed dramatically, but the one time I was there, the display was just awful. They had more beautiful portraits than you've ever seen, and they were all just slapped up on the wall 6D.
How long ago was that?
15 years ago. And I understand.
Give it another go. It changed quite a bit. It definitely makes some big improvement. All right. I'm going to call it off. We're at 43 minutes. Sam, I really enjoyed this conversation. I love what you're doing. I invite everybody to check the links in the podcast you will share it with me, and I will put it there so people can get in touch with you, visit your website, and if you're interested to, of course, read your book and participate in your Substack channel. And for everybody, subscribe. I hope we're sharing good stories worth your time to listen and get inspired to either write or tell story or listen to story, because we need both, right? We need those that tells the story. We need those that love to read the stories.
We need both.
So Sam, thank you so much. Really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Marco. It was a delight. When you're in the South Bay, I'm buying the coffee.
Oh yeah, that's on the calendar. We'll do
Okay,
that.
good man.
Take
Thank
care,
you.
everybody. Thank you for listening. Sean,
Marco.
we are here to deliver a message from the RSA conference team.
It's an important message from our friends. RSA Conference 2025, just around the corner, where insights drive action, solutions emerge, and community connections spark innovation. You'll be there. I'll be there. We invite everybody else to be there April 28th through May 1st. You can secure your spot at rsaconference.com/ITSPMAG25. That's ITSPMAG25. See you all there.
I'll be there. See you there.